Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and I'm pleased to tell you that the second edition of the Codex is now available for $2.99 on Kindle. It is the story of the weaponization of DNA, Satan's greatest and final attempt to wipe out the Levitical line, the priesthood, to keep the Sanhedrin, which is formed, from getting the high priest that will lead them to call for the return of Jesus. It's an amazing story based on biblical truth. It will take you on a thriller, a ride like a roller coaster ride through what you think 23andMe is so innocent and so helpful, but yet that database is being used by the enemy. Maybe they're looking for you. This is the book for you, $2.99. I'm also the author of The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. And just today, I received a copy of it in Indonesian from an Indonesian printer partner there. And so it's now being distributed all over our audience, which is right now listening to us live prime time in Indonesia. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to a dear friend of this program and the CEO and chairman of the board of hopefortheheart.org, June Hunt. June, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Love being with you. It's an honor.
Oh, it's our honor. June is one of the world's leading biblical counselors, an author, singer, and speaker. She founded Hope for the Heart in 1986. Her life's work has yielded landmark contributions in the field of Christian counseling. The ministry offers biblical hope and practical help through biblical counsel, coaching, and context for contemporary concerns in more than 60 countries on 6 continents. And you can find her and all these great resources at hopefortheheart.org. June, Phyllis has been just such a spectacular resource in your organization. I just want to take my hat off and compliment Phyllis, give her a big shout out for her perseverance and enduring. You had some organizational changes and your video person moved on, and Phyllis just said, we've got to get June back on the air. We're going to get this thing going. Rabbi Eric and June have this personal connection that they want to grab the bull by the horns and tell the truth. They should probably create a website for you and I called inyourface.com.
That would be absolutely true of you.
There you go. Okay. But today I want to talk about, and we have one of your books up that talks about sexual propriety and sexual promiscuity and addresses this issue of all that's going on. But the news has been filled with a new wave of kind of coming out about sexual harassment and assault. And the body of Christ has been extremely silent on this issue, with the exception of this one person. And this one person was guilty of what we in America and throughout the world have coined the phrase casting couch. And when I began to think about all that means, it's exchanging sexual favors for a role in a film or a movie, and it's become commonplace. And I wondered how commonplace it had become, so I looked to see that it was first mentioned in Vanity Fair magazine in 1937. So for 81 years, even the body of Christ within America has allowed this term to permeate our vocabulary, where you can look it up in Webster's dictionary. It's an actual phrase that's coined and used and has a meaning associated with it, and there was no outcry.
Well, we have a problem. It's called quid pro quo. What that means is, I'll give you something, you give me something. It's an exchange, as you're indicating. And if I want a better grade in school, we're not talking about just in the film industry. This has been used in education. If you want an A, I need you to do a special favor for me. Come to my home, and then the sexual favor is expected. Sometimes the student isn't even aware of what the setup is. But I can help you. I can help you get that A. I know you're wanting to get into a better school in college. And so basically what we're talking about is high school, college, in the workforce. There is that misuse of power, and then you're talking about a person in power who has something, who could actually keep a person from having that job. In other words, you're fired. You're literally dismissed from the workplace, or you can't get work on this film, as you're now indicating with Harvey Weinstein and all of the phenomenal play of, and testimony for what his obstructions were or his sexual favors were. It is an unprecedented time. I've never seen anything like it. I've never heard of anything like this. This is unique in human history, where all of a sudden, headline after headline, story after story reveals sexual predators, those who have been literally preying on those who many times are unsuspecting until they get into it, and then they get trapped. They feel powerless to do anything, and at the time they are powerless unless they have been trained what to do.
June, we saw the scandal of the Boy Scouts, the scandal of the Catholic Church, but that didn't seem to move the marker closer to Christ. It didn't seem to provoke the pastor in the pulpit to preach out about this. It seemed that we just went back to our complacent message. I'm not saying all, but it just seems that the spotlight should have shifted on the prohibition for the church in Acts chapter 15, saying that, listen, you don't have to carry 613 laws over, but 4 of them you do, and one of those is abstain from sexual immorality. Yes. And I would consider sexual harassment, sexual assault, rape, same-sex, as was in the Catholic Church, same-sex as was in the Boy Scouts. All those fall into the category of sexual immorality, and it should be a headliner.
Well, it was a headliner a few years ago in terms of winning, I think, Best Picture. And you used the word spotlight. There was a movie called Spotlight, yes, that won Best Picture. Now, it was a spotlight on Boston, the Boston Globe, and it was what took place in the Catholic Church. But I want to be very careful here. If you make that only in that tiny spotlight, we've missed what really is going on. It's church after church. And by the way, I am for the church. I'm not against the church, but I'm for a healthy church.
Yes.
And this is why there are some major movements in terms of, if children go to a restroom in a church, there are many churches which require 2 adults to walk with that child. In other words, not one adult going into the restroom. And you think, isn't that excessive? No, aren't you just, making it all negative? No, you're making it safe and positive. The key word is safe.
Yes.
Everyone wants to feel safe. Eric, you want to feel safe. I want to feel safe. And yet we know that there are times where there are people who will take advantage of a unsuspecting person. So let's get real here. Here's something now in our year, a few months ago, that occurred. It's the largest sexual assault scandal in sports history. The largest. And who would have ever thought? Gymnastics, women's gymnastics. And it, let me mention one. I'm going to tell you a story about a woman. Well, she started out as a gymnast, age 12. She was a homeschooled child, and they provided time for her to practice and practice, and she was superb and did these wonderful vaults, and with great confidence, and by age 15 she was having lower back pain, and so the Den Hollander family, her family, took her to Michigan State University, a doctor there, Dr. Larry Nasser. And the fabulous news was, my goodness, he's the doctor for the USA gymnast team. That's phenomenal. And so that meant there were Olympic champions that even had been a part of the individuals that he had served. So you're talking about a major key player. And so she goes in at age 15 for a treatment and had multiple treatments that year that were all sexually invasive, and she didn't know what to do. It's like her Olympic dreams of that are so right. It's like they tumble because the ungloved hand of Larry Nasser was doing things that were not protocol, and yet how is she to think about this? She thought, but he's a doctor. And I can't refuse these treatments because I want to perform my gymnastics. And she was too embarrassed to do anything about it. She stayed silent. She dreaded, though, every single treatment that she had. And the scripture says in Psalm 6, my soul is in deep anguish. How long, Lord? How long? And so she would dread these treatments where he did unorthodox treatments. And ultimately what we're talking about is there was a day when now she became an adult. Children do grow up. Well, she's an attorney, and she put a complaint out. That complaint was just basically filed. It was not taken seriously, although there were many complaints for this Dr. Larry Nasser. And yet he was defended over and over. The mom learns about what has happened and is just crushed because she was there, yet he positioned himself where he could not see what was going on. She could not see where, and he would just talk with idle chatter and it sounded fine, though her view was obstructed. And so all these parents feel guilty who were there in a treatment room, but it was very calculating. What ultimately happened was he was convicted of not that charge initially. It was like 31,000 videos, materials on his computer of child pornography. Over 31,000. And so here he has this sentence, but not long ago you have 165 personal testimonies at his sentencing trial for, now it's not child porn, but it is sexual assault. And this 7-day time of testimony, one after another. Listen to this. I'm quoting her. Larry, I can call what you did evil because it was. The Bible, and he's walking in with the Bible you carry says it is better for a millstone to be thrown around your neck and you be thrown into the lake than for you to make even one child stumble, and you have damaged hundreds. Of course, she is quoting from the Bible, right, what Jesus said. And the issue is, listen to this. This was huge. Now, understand, Rachel Den Hollander is a strong Christian. She has become an advocate in churches for those churches that, well, for victims who were sexually assaulted, and yet they weren't believed, just as there are all these hundreds of people literally who have been victimized by this one man. This is what she said in her testimony. The Bible carries a final judgment where all God's wrath and eternal terror is poured out on men like you. Should you ever reach the point of truly facing what you have done, the guilt will be crushing. And that is what makes the gospel of Christ so sweet, because it extends grace and hope and mercy where none should be found. And it will be there for you. I pray, listen to this, I pray you will experience the soul-crushing weight of guilt so that you may someday experience true repentance and true forgiveness from God, which you need far more than forgiveness from me, though I extend that to you as well. So here she is the final testament giver. She is called by the judge the 5-star general who coordinated these 7 days of testimonies. Initially, many gymnasts were not speaking up. But when they found out, oh, others are speaking up. And here you have gymnasts who have won gold medals, one after another, many medal recipients, whether it's bronze, silver, gold. They testify, this is what this so-called doctor doing so-called medical treatment. It wasn't treatment. He would be literally deceptive, and he would be invasive. He was doing what is ungodly. Ultimately, now it was up to 175 years was his sentence, tacked on to the years of sentence for the child pornography. So I think this is an unprecedented time to evaluate. I mean, you and I know that 4 years prior, there was a Penn State situation. This isn't just females. We're talking about for football. It was unprecedented there, the multiple individuals that charged Jerry Sandusky the abuse, the sexual abuse. But notice, person in power, and they feel that they can get away with it. But $100 million has now been poured out by Penn State just on this one case.
Yes, I'm a Penn State graduate.
Oh, wow. So you know all about that.
I'm very, very familiar. Now, in the language of this issue that we're facing, we're looking at sexual harassment, which is workplace related, that women or men may be subjected to harassment in some form through comments, through touch, through positioning, really being feeling threatened in their space. You have sexual assault, and then you have out and out rape. What are the differences between those? And they all fall under the category of sexual sin or sins of the flesh.
Sexual abuse, yes. Well, I think that's an important distinction. The way I describe it, now, there's not a consistency in all the materials that you would see. Some would call sexual harassment what would be more sexual assault, in my opinion. But just let's make it simple. In general, we're talking about sexual harassment would be unwanted sexual behavior without sexual contact. Without sexual contact, that creates this uncomfortable, intimidating environment. And sometimes it's, as you've already described, the quid pro quo, like, I'll give you this for that. And in other words, even the wording, the presenting of that would be harassment. It's unwanted, it's unwelcome, it's demeaning, and sometimes it's just these comments, you're so hot, I I wonder what it would be like in bed with you. Just putting mental images that are not right to say to a human being, or if I had you, I would do this. And just these things. Now, that's without the physical contact. Or it can be just blatant stares at a woman's private parts, or a man's too. Dirty jokes, stories that are definitely so sexualized, indecent exposure. We're talking about exhibitionism. There's not contact. So, in general, we can think of it in this way. Then there's sexual assault. Now, that's when there is unwanted sexual contact, often through manipulation, coercion, intimidation, force. It can be, just this force where there's an abuse of authority. Literally, years ago, when I was first teaching on the topic of rape, I I remember thinking, interesting. If you were to be, if a man, not you, if a man were to be arrested for rape, it's not really called rape. It would be sexual assault. And I knew that a long time ago. And I presented that it could be aggravated sexual assault with a weapon or a threat of death. So, or an attempt to kill someone. But the point is, we're talking about from fondling, groping, to all the way to penetration. Now, rape by itself is exclusively penetration, sexual penetration. It would be sexual intercourse, but by threat or deception or just force, and that is against the law. Yet many people, many victims, if they report it, it's like, what did you do to cause it? Let me make a comment. No one causes another person to rape. It doesn't matter what a person is wearing. A person who rapes is making a choice, a very evil choice that is forbidden by God in the Bible, certainly, but it is against civil laws. So what we have to be so aware of is the pain that victims so often feel, because they know bad things can happen to them, but where is the protection when they come forward? And well, you have to prove it, and even that something would be believed. I had one time, Eric, a man. Well, we had someone on our staff, and I could tell that there was a lot of pain, and I was trying to figure out what is happening. And she had a doctorate, and yet she wanted to volunteer. And then it did hire her for some minimal things, and then, but I knew she wasn't in church, and I didn't know why. And so I said, well, why don't you come with me? Let me take you to church, and I'll introduce you to our pastor. When I said that, it was like this look of terror, and I could tell that she said, no, I don't want to meet the pastor. And so later I went back to her. I said, has something happened to you with the pastor? And so she told about a man who was a pastor, not her pastor, but a man who would come to her residence, and apparently she was deceptive. Well, I mean, it was just bad. So I go to a seminary professor. I tell this man, he said, well, June, you have to have a smoking gun. I said, a smoking gun. Okay, we have to have proof. And so I go back to her, and so I'm going to tell you literally what happened. She said, well, would it help if I describe to you his anatomy, which goes one particular direction? I said, I think that's sufficient. So I go back, and all of a sudden, to have this information, now this man is confronted by several godly men in authority, and ultimately he is removed from his church. By the way, he had been removed before, but he just got passed on.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of one of these multi cultural churches. And this man was incredibly gifted, but yet it's the passing on, and without accountability. And so
you're exactly right, June. You know, it's interesting as we get ready to go to break that you made a very, very clear point. No one is responsible for another person's sin. We're responsible for our own sin. And
yes.
in our relationship with Jesus, as we see things from our past, present, and even as our future direction seems to be going, where there is that seed, there is that temptation, there is that putting yourself in that position, we have to examine ourselves, not the behavior of another person where we might be tempted. God, it says, God does not tempt us. We will be tested, but God does not tempt us.
Yes.
Although we will encounter temptation. We have to master. I remember the words that he said to Cain. He said, sin is crouching at your door, and if you do not master it, it will overcome you.
Yes.
This is what we're talking about, with people finally taking responsibility for their own behavior and their own actions. We're talking with June Hunt of Hope for the Heart.org, and we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to continue to talk about this very important issue of sexual harassment and assault, stopping the abuse of power. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our one-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with June Hunt, Board Chair, CEO, and Chief Servant Officer of HopeForTheHeart.org. June has written books on almost every topic that you could possibly imagine that affects the life of the believer. It's one of the reasons we love to have June Hunt on our program, is because we too want to address the issues that face a believer's life. We are not immune. We have no inoculation against the world. Jesus says, if you follow me, there will be tribulation. These are the kind of tribulations we're facing, but there is good news on the other side, that our hope and our trust is in the Lord. He is our rock, He is our Redeemer, and He will redeem us with an outstretched right hand if we will just take a hold of it and allow Him to pull us through some of these horrible and wretched situations. June, welcome back to the show. We were talking about sexual predators. We were talking about victims of sexual assault, the gymnastics, the Penn Staters, the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts. What are some of the myths and truths that have been purveyed out there that people buy into, and that believers, especially since the gift of discernment is something that we all are to seek after and receive, that gift of discernment, we should be able to discern that when we find ourselves in a situation that we should be blowing the whistle, we should be extracting ourselves, we should, as Paul said, shun all appearance of wrongdoing. So I shouldn't be counseling a woman by myself in a closed-off office. I shouldn't be taking a young girl to the restroom, even as a minister and a counselor. I shouldn't put myself in that position. We have to become much more self-aware. But what are some of the myths and truths that are believed by victims of sexual assault and rape?
Let's say there's a bunch of guys, and here are these males. They're impressionable, and they're told, females secretly want to be raped. Now, that is what is said in certain groups.
Yes.
Women secretly want to be raped. Now, think about that. Is that a myth? Yes, it's a myth. In other words, no one wants to be a victim of a violent criminal act. No one wants to be violated sexually and emotionally torn up by another person. In fact, the Bible even says in Ezekiel 45, give up your violence and oppression and do what is just and right. So that's one myth. The second is rape is not committed when there's mutual consent. Well, now wait a minute. Silence of a child, I'm talking about a minor, a person who's considered a minor, depending on what state this person is from. That varies from state to state in the United States. But the silence of a child who doesn't imply consent or does, I guess what I want to say is it is called sexual assault. It is rape if that child of a person who's a minor is sexually penetrated. It is rape, and the child may say nothing because that child may not know what to say. Likewise, there are other situations. There are those who do not know how to, those who are mentally incapacitated. The point is, if you remain silent, the Bible even says, I remained utterly silent, but my anguish increased. Interesting scripture, Psalm 39. Now this is going to be very common, and you've already alluded to it. Provocative women cause rape. Well, look what she was wearing. She caused it because she wore this kind of clothing. She had that appearance. She was at this location. The most probable victim of a person is one who is vulnerable, not who has a particular clothing attire. So no one deserves to be raped. The ultimate responsibility, as you've already said, Eric, the ultimate responsibility is solely on the rapist, not the victim. And I have to present this one. A wife must be subject and submit to sexual relations at any time with her husband. That is her obligation, and it is marital privilege. Years ago, when I was first teaching on this topic, I was stunned. There were certain states within the United States that had no law against what is called mate rape. What we're talking about is when you hear the word rape, most people think you're talking about strangers. No, that's a tiny, tiny percentage. Usually rape occurs with someone that is known. It's usually an acquaintance. So there can be date rape, there can be mate rape, there can be hate rape. But the point is, here, if we're talking about mate rape, it wasn't even, there's no law against it in a number of states. And so when I was going to be teaching on this very topic, as I did last weekend for 7 hours, I was very interested to see what were the statistics now. Well, what's fascinating is all of the United States, all 50 states have a law against mate rape. However, some omit, or the language allows mate rape in certain situations, if you will, because I'm going to give you a situation that actually occurred in England. A man literally drugged his wife, videoed over 300 times his assault on his wife. She didn't say no because she wasn't cognizant of what was happening. She was drugged. So there are those who are drugged, and so we need to have laws that are very clear in this situation, or if somebody is mentally incapacitated. By the way, the person who attended our conference that we had just recently, I did not know her. She drove in from Houston, and I was sitting at a table where there would be conversation in between. We had guided questions. And first somebody said, well, are you a counselor? She said, no. And then when she had time to speak within this little circle of people, she said, I'm here because this is my last hope. She had been sexually violated by her father for years. Now, Lynn, she married. And then there was a time where she was in a wreck and she had a neck injury and it was very painful. And the doctor gave her Ambien. Take this and you need to go and sleep. So she goes in that evening upstairs after dinner and she takes the Ambien. And then 20 minutes later, her husband comes in and against her will, she just physically cannot stave him off. That is mate rape. And the pain, the lack of trust that she has with this husband has been horrible because he would take advantage of her, thinking, I have a right. And it's like a woman is a piece of property. My wife is a piece of property. Does he say those exact words? No, but he treats her as such because there was a time, and in certain areas of the world, there is no law against a husband doing anything he wants to a wife. So these are some specifics. By the way, the Bible does say, husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. That's in Colossians 3:19. So we see that the Bible does not endorse though any type of harsh treatment with a wife just because there is a marriage. It is not marriage privilege. That would be wrong.
You know, it's so interesting you bring this up. Next week I have a guest on who's written a book called The Handmaiden's Conspiracy. And it's the misinterpretation of the writings of Paul going all the way back into the Hebrew as to what a woman was created for. And most people say, oh, well, I know that. That's easy. God created a woman to be a helpmate. Well, the Hebrew actually says a match. It doesn't say a helpmate. It says he found no suitable helper for him, so he made a match, meaning that it was equal. This was equal status. And this equality was there. You then plot it through, and we have victimized women, and we have subjugated women. We have this outrage for the slavery in America, which there should have been outrage. We should have had outrage over the 400 years that my people were enslaved, and more outrage about the Holocaust than we get, but we're such a minority, and it's such a controversial issue within the world about the status of Israel and the Jews and the rights. We don't find that outrage, but the time has come now for the body of Christ to stand up and take a look at what the message was and understand that these were not just words being said, that if you did not have the training yourself, you have the training. You have become a voice of hope for so many. Imagine if you had been subjugated in silence because somebody took one letter of Paul when it said that women should not be teachers. First of all, no unqualified person, period, should be a teacher. A teacher is held to a higher standard. This was about a specific group, a specific, very immature, very uneducated, very much orthopractic. It had a very definitive message to it, but we made it doctrinal, and we have entire denominations that have silenced women and subjugated women. And imagine if Deborah, what would have happened to Israel had Deborah said, oh no, I have no rights, I have no power, I have no authority, I can't do this, I'll just let the nation collapse. You know, we go all the way through. What if Mary said, you know what, hey Gabriel, hey, thanks for calling. But, I'm just really, I'm not in a position. They're going to stone me. I'm just not in a position, and I don't want to bring the shame onto my family, and I'm just not in a position to do this. So would you mind finding somebody else?
Yes.
You
And this
know,
Priscilla and Aquila, with her name mentioned first, and
yes,
incredibly influential in the life of one of the major leaders in earliest Christendom. So yeah, there's a precedence. There were even prophetesses that were
absolutely.
presented.
Yes.
So unfortunately, you can. Um, Basically, if you build a doctrine on one passage here, that's one thing. You have to instead look at the whole counsel of God. And that's what you're saying. We must look at the whole counsel of God.
June, we've identified that there's a problem out there with sexual harassment and assault, that there is an ongoing silence, a hush, almost the way cancer was spoken of 30 years ago. It was kind of whispered, cancer. No, it wasn't proclaimed the way it is. But out of everything in this world, God is sovereign. And what the enemy means for evil, God will find a way to work for good, for the salvation of many. And we've got about 5 minutes left in this segment. You have a story that you'd like to share about a certain individual that went through a rape and how God was able to use that for His glory.
I never will forget hearing her voice, the life trauma that she experienced. This is Dr. Helen Roseveare from England. And she was sent as a medical missionary. She's a medical doctor to help the people in the Congo. Now, she was there for basically a decade. There were no salvations, but she took care of the people. She helped establish clinics. It was phenomenal what she did. And then there was a civil uprising. And this was a horrendous event where there were the whites against the blacks, and the whites slaughtered thousands of the blacks. So the whites became the enemies of the blacks. And then the missionaries, there were many, many missionaries that were slaughtered in retaliation. And there were some that were instead taken captive, and Helen Roseveare was one. And she knew the brutality that the other missionaries who now were dead had incurred. And she thought, oh, if I'm going to be captive, I think, would I not rather be dead? But the point is, she was brutalized, broken teeth, lacerations on her face, ribs, all these things, and she was raped. And then the leader, the rebel leader, later looks at her and says, what's the matter with you? And she said, one of your lot raped me. And he said, not true, liar. And she said, I'll point him out to you. And she did. And so he performed a people's court. There were 800 men in this people's court. And he told them, he instructed them, after she gives her testimony, yell, liar, liar. And so she, upon her testimony, she describes what occurred. At the conclusion, something that had never happened before occurred. You could hear the voice of, in essence, 800 men audibly weeping. This was their Mama Luca. She was called Mama Luca, right, as in Luke. The Luke in the Bible, the Luke who was the author of the book of Luke and Acts, the man who's called Luke was a physician. Well, they called her Mama Luca. She was the one who had birthed their babies. She was the one who had cared for their cuts. She was the one who had showed compassion when they needed it. and medically treated them.
Yes.
Now she had been assaulted, sexually assaulted, raped by one of them. And so all of a sudden, after this occurrence, this trial, there was salvation after salvation after salvation. There was a group of Greeks over here. They wanted to know, how do you have this changed life, whatever this change was. Many of them became Christians. And now she's back in her native country in England. She's frequently asked to speak, but rarely speaks about the rape. In this particular evening, she's speaking what had happened. And at the conclusion, there were people who would naturally come up and want to talk with her. At the very end, there were two left standing. A young girl comes up and says, "My sister was raped 5 weeks ago, and she hasn't spoken a word. Would you be willing to talk with her?" And she turns and opens up her arms, her outstretched arms, in which this girl runs into her arms, and she talks nonstop for 3 hours. The two of them talk. And it's a type of healing that this girl needed. And the whole key was this. Years before, it was, the question, why, God? Why would you allow this to happen? And what God told her following the rape, this is Helen Roosevelt, would you be willing to trust me even if I never tell you why? And she said, "Yes, Lord, you've been faithful to me. I will be willing to trust you even if you never tell me why." And then here are all these salvations that occur in the Congo. And the medical work increases immensely. And now she's in England, and she tells a story. Would you be willing to trust me even if I never tell you why? And the young girl says, "I've never heard. Would I be willing to trust God even if he never tells me why?" Well, you can see that what God did is use that personal experience, which is not experienced by everyone, but for the two of them, they have this common denominator. Helen Roosevelt has credibility because she has been through it. And so it enabled her to have stretched capacity. Anytime we go through anything difficult, it stretches our capacity for compassion. That's one, and if you just say just one reason, it will stretch your capacity for compassion and give you an opportunity to reach out to those who are hurt and harmed and give them hope.
Well, June, once again, you and I have stretched our capacity because we've run out of time.
Yes,
and
indeed.
It's just such a joy to have you back with us here on Revealing the Truth. I want to encourage all of our audience to go to hopefortheheart.org. Look at all the resources, the online store, all of the books, all of the resources that Junas provide. Every one of them is a gold nugget. If you have her entire collection, then you will be able to face almost every challenge that comes your way. And June is vibrant, alive, and still producing new teaching material. I can't tell you enough how much we support our partnership with hopefortheheart.org. June, it's so great to see you, and I hope I'm going to see you. We're going to work it out where we can have you back here every month on Revealing the Truth. We're going to take a short break, and we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.